Welcome to
The ALEJO Show.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the ALEJO Show. It's really a pleasure to have you all here. And today, as usual, we are going to have a great guest. Somebody that I've known for many, many years. Big fan. I used to watch his television show, and that really helped me a lot to learn English. And we're going to talk about these kind of things. Felipe Andrés Echavarría Moliet is in the house. Hey, Felipe, Andrew. I'm going to call you Andrew because I think it's great.
That works.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for being on the show, man.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
Okay. So here's the thing. You're Colombian.
I'm very
but,
Colombian.
But you lived in Alaska for, what, 20 years?
For a little bit more than 12 years. But to explain it correctly, I was born in Los Angeles.
Okay.
In Los Angeles, Villahermosa.
I thought it was Los Angeles, California. Okay, Los Angeles, Villahermosa, here in Colombia.
Here in Medellin.
All right,
I was born here in Medellin. And when I was a newborn, my parents took me to Alaska, where they had been living for about 10 years. My mother had been living there her whole life. My mother's from Alaska, from the United States. My father's Colombian. And I lived there until I was 12. I moved back to Colombia for 1 year, which was 89, 90.
Okay.
I did my, it was seventh grade, first year of junior high. Then I went back to Alaska for 2 years, and then I came back when I was 15. And I've been here almost all my life since, except right before I graduated, I went to live for 2 years in the United States. Sort of have you heard the term sowing your roots?
Okay.
I had to leave my home and leave my family and discover what life was really about. And so I went and lived in the United States for 2 years. I lived in New Mexico and in North Carolina and in Miami and Florida. And then I moved back to Colombia. And I've been here ever since.
But the first season you went to live in Alaska, and the whole time you were there, you were with your mother and your father. Right. So you were speaking both languages, like Spanish and English?
Yes.
Because you told us that you came back to study here. So probably you should have known English and Spanish as well.
Right. I spoke English and Spanish, and my father and my mother they got divorced when I was really young, when I was about 4 years old.
Oh, okay.
And my father remarried a Colombian woman.
Okay.
And so my stepmother was Colombian. So when I was at my father's house, we'd always speak in Spanish.
All right.
So I spoke Spanish all the time, as well as English there, but I didn't learn Spanish grammar. Because I was just speaking at home, right?
So you used to make a lot of mistakes when you were talking.
Right. But I
Yo no ocupe, like these kind of things.
You know what I would say? I would say a lot. Well, for example, with the genre, with the gender.
Okay.
If it's ends in a, then it's la casa.
La casa,
right?
All right.
And if it ends in o, it's el carro, el caballo,
all right.
El moto.
Okay. All right. Okay, el moto. Okay.
And so everybody would laugh at me, my cousins, people at school would laugh, ha ha ha, el gringo, wah 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 wah. And I'd say, if it ends in O, why is it not L?
Exactly.
And so everybody's like, I don't know, ha ha ha, and they would keep on laughing. And so
you're laughing at me, but you have no idea why.
Right.
Okay.
So this inspired me to teach myself Spanish grammar, to learn Spanish grammar. And so in Spanish class, I was the super nerd, and I paid attention to everything, and I learned Spanish really well. So much that when I went back to Alaska for 2 years, and I came back when I was 15, I went to a school called El Fontan here in Medellin. And when you go to the Fontan, you have to do these initial exams to find out what level you are in every different subject, in math, in social studies, in Spanish, in English, in geography, whatever, and everything.
And how much you got from Spanish?
Well, the thing is this: there were 17 new students when I got in there, and there were
all of them Colombians, of course.
There were 2 or 3 that were also gringos, that were of Colombian descent. That their parents were Colombian and they moved back to Colombia. But the other 14 were all Colombians from here. They had been in school in Colombia, and I was the only one that didn't have to do bases de español.
Because you already knew everything, because you were studying.
Because I had studied and I had set the goal of learning Spanish grammar really well.
Did you struggle also with English at some point when you were growing up and try to learn the grammar? Because you were speaking obviously by imitation with your parents, but did you have the same sensation? I don't know how to conjugate things.
The thing is this. I've always liked languages,
All right.
right? Whether it be your native language, which actually I have both, Spanish and English are my native languages, or any kind of language. I've always wanted to learn French. I don't speak French, but I like to study it online and stuff. And it just comes naturally. And the thing is, the trick to learning something is to pay attention in class. The mistake that we make in everything when we're studying something is we're in class and
we're thinking about
or we're joking
else.
around with the other classmates nowadays with the cell phone.
That's a very nerdy advice. Like, pay attention to class. I mean, people will say like, duh, obviously, but
they
it's
don't do
not.
it.
It's not that obvious. I mean, normally, as you said, as human beings, we tend to be distracted by many other things,
Right.
rather to paying attention to teacher or the tutor or whatever.
So the trick is to pay attention in class. I mean, take advantage of that time that you're there in class.
Okay.
Pay attention. You know, you have the whole rest of the day to goof off and gossip.
Just try to focus that hour and a half or
Exactly,
whatever. Okay, that's
exactly.
a good strategy.
And practice.
Let me ask you something before we go to practice. I just had a baby. She's
Okay.
3 months old, and I got this question asked all the time. Like, are you going to talk to your daughter English or Spanish? And since you grew up kind of with both languages, what will be your recommendation, not only to me but to everybody who's paying attention, and say like, okay, I have a new baby. I kind of know Spanish and know English, and I would like my baby to speak both very good. What would be your recommendation?
Do it. Do it.
Okay.
Do it. I have a 5-year-old daughter.
All
She's
right.
5 years old, and she's lived her whole life here in Colombia, and I've spoken to her in English since she was a baby.
What do you do? Like you say hello, and the mom says hi, so she kind of.
Well, the thing is it's now that she's 5 and now that she speaks, she's a little radio. You know, she never stops talking. It's hard to still speak English because she's speaking in Spanish all the time.
Of course.
So it's lots of times I start answering her in Spanish, and so I try to remember English. And the thing is, even though she doesn't speak to me in English, right?
She understands.
She understands everything I say.
But wasn't she frustrated at some point? Like, I don't know what you're saying. Well, obviously she's gonna say that in Spanish. Like, no te entiendo, papá, and you're trying to make her understand something. Isn't that like a little bit frustrating for a kid?
Well, that's one of the amazing things about children, especially children nowadays. It's like they understand everything anyways. But the other thing that I do is whenever she watches a TV or any online series or something like that, I always put it in English.
Ah, okay.
I never let her watch anything in Spanish. And sometimes she'll say, papi, es que no entiendo. And I'll say, well,
Ponla en español, por
no,
favor.
and then I'll say, what did you not understand? And she said, she said this. And so I'll rewind a little bit and I'll explain it to her what they're saying.
In English.
In English.
Oh,
in English.
okay,
right?
okay.
You know, to take the time and, actually be a teacher as well as a father. It's hard sometimes because we're teachers. So that's what we do at work, is when we get home, we don't want to keep on doing our job,
Not at all.
Right, we want to just relax and do that. But it's really worth it. It's really worth it for the children and for our families if we have that knowledge to give that to them. And as children, it's really easy for them to do that. And for example, I'll talk to her in English and she'll answer me in Spanish, but then we'll go somewhere and we'll meet somebody from the United States or from Canada.
And she will say some kind
and boom, she'll just start speaking in English.
Exactly.
'cause
Okay,
she knows
so that works a lot.
Right, it does work. It does
Okay,
work.
let's go back by the time to the time when you were living in Alaska.
Okay.
The first thought that comes to my mind about Alaska is being so freaking cold. Like, how could people live there? Because it's kind of funny because Alaska is like separated from the States and is up on the north part of Canada, let's say that, and it's so freaking cold. How did you live there, and then knowing that you're half Colombian, we live in the tropic? Was it hard?
Well, I'll tell you a story to put that into context. I lived there. Until I was 3. We lived on a small little island north of Kodiak, which is southeastern Alaska.
Okay.
And so we were in the middle of nowhere, with the wind chill factor, which is you have a temperature, say it's 10 below.
Wow.
But it starts getting windy. It can get to 30 below because of the wind.
Jesus Christ,
right?
That's not human.
And so, the wind chill factor would make it very cold. But because you're in Alaska, you are completely prepared all the time.
Okay.
There's a saying, I'll say it in Spanish and then in English, es mejor tenerlo y no necesitarlo que necesitarlo y no tenerlo.
Exactly.
That should be like the Alaskan anthem.
All right.
It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
So, like, for example, you might have like 3 coats in your car just because.
Right, exactly. So you're always prepared. Of course, there are idiots that aren't, but most everybody's always prepared for whatever they need, and so you really don't suffer cold. You know, you might be in a situation where you have the right jacket, but you don't have the right gloves.
Okay.
So your fingers are really cold.
All right.
Or you have the right boots, but you don't have the right jacket. So your feet are warm, but you're feeling cold, your body. But usually you have the right equipment and you're feeling okay. The most cold that I have ever felt in my life wasn't in Alaska.
Don't tell me it
was here in Colombia.
No way.
And it was actually here in Medellin.
No way.
It was. I remember I was with some friends. It was 20 years ago, and we were riding our motorcycles. We had gone de la Vuelta Oriente.
Okay.
Right. You know, just little
How fast did you
B80.
go?
No, just little B80s or little small motorcycles. Okay. But coming down from Guarne, I think it's El Alto de la Virgen.
All right.
Is that what it's called? El Alto de la Virgen. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
And this tropical storm came out of nowhere, and it was just lightning and thunder and wind and rain. I mean, torrential rain, and we had to stop. The storm was so strong that we had to stop our motorcycles, pull over to the side of the road, and get like in this little little hut, chasita, that was closed, and try to find out which side would protect us from the wind.
And then you said, I'm really cold, and people were laughing like, come on, you're from Alaska.
Well,
I mean, that's your superpower. You can never be cold.
Well, the truth is nobody was laughing.
Everybody was as
Everybody
cold as you.
was, exactly. We thought we were, and I remember thinking, it's crazy because the coldest I've ever been in my life right now is this, because we were completely wet. And so when you're wet, that's when it's dangerous. Okay. That's when the cold is dangerous. I mean, you can be in a situation in Colombia and be wet. And if you're in a páramo, for example, in a high mountain, if you get wet, you can get hypothermia and die.
Exactly.
You know, because being wet and the wind, it's called the wind chill factor. So let's say it's 2 degrees. It's 2 degrees. It's not freezing, but because you're wet and because it's windy, you can get the effect of being 10 or 15 degrees below zero here in Colombia in a páramo. So that happened there. We were just wet and windy, and being wet and windy is the worst situation possible.
When you were in school and you told everybody that you were Colombian, did people know about Colombia in those schools? Because when I lived in Minnesota, people were like absolutely, they had no idea about Colombia. They thought Shakira was from New York, and they laugh at me when I said Shakira's from Colombia. They said that's not correct. Did they know about Colombia when you said? Would you say that you were from Colombia at those?
No, I think that in general, people have like the wrong idea, especially about places that are exotic. And the truth is, both Colombia and Alaska are exotic places.
Yeah,
they're strange.
That's not
places.
very usual.
Right, exactly. So the ideas they have about Alaska are, people don't imagine Alaska having a city. Okay. And I lived in a city, and I went to a normal high school, and we had a bus system, and we had shopping malls, and neighborhoods, and the same.
Yeah, like a city.
Like a normal North American city. And it's the same thing here. People don't imagine that Colombia has cities and that we have infrastructure. And I have a friend actually from the United States who lives here now, and he says that he has
He thought we were Indians.
No. He didn't have any expectations. But living here, he says that even we don't appreciate
what we have.
Like, I'll say, what do you mean? He says, well, if you're in the United States and you don't have a car, it's really hard for you to go from one town to another.
We can walk and we can use the metro and
and going from what he says is from in different towns. There's so many buses that take you to every single town in Antioquia or in Colombia. They don't have that in the United States.
Yeah, that's true.
It's true. They don't.
Exactly.
And it's like, there's a bus that goes to this town day after tomorrow.
Okay.
But here, it's what time do you want to leave? At 6, at 8, at 10, at 12?
Yeah, we have a lot of options over there.
And so things like that, so people don't imagine that we're like that. And I don't think it's that people have the wrong idea. I just think it's information. They don't have the information.
Exactly. I've been looking forward to having you in the show for many reasons. And one of the reasons is that you're a great actor.
Thank you.
That's one of your professions. And since you're an actor, you have to embrace a lot of different accents sometimes. And you're an expert in English and Spanish. And a lot of my students keep asking me, hey, how can I be prepared to understand accents? Because, a person from New York might speak differently from a person from Indiana, Ohio, and even Alaska.
Right.
So one of the 1,000 questions I have is, do people from Alaska have like a very strong accent that people from Colombia, not native speakers, might be confused, or do they have like a very neutral?
Very neutral. That's one of the cool things about Alaska is that it's one of the places that has the most neutral accents.
Really?
As such, the thing about Alaska, you have people from all over. You have people from all over the United States, from all over the world in Alaska. So you have different types of accents, but it's because that person comes from the place where that accent is.
It's not like he was born there and he has an accent. No, I mean it's because
people that are born in Alaska have very neutral accents.
Okay.
Very neutral. And what I would explain to people, to my students, because I've also been an English teacher for.
Exactly.
I mean, I always say that I do a lot of things, but I have a list of occupations of jobs that I do. But my number one job is acting. And I would say my number two job is teaching English.
Exactly.
And what I explain to people is that when you think about accents, and maybe you're nervous about this, or you've traveled and you see that accents are very different and they're hard to understand. I say, okay, let's not talk about English. Let's think about Spanish. Everybody in Medellin, for example, at one time or another drove to Cartagena with their family, right? And let's say you got a flat tire in Sahagún, Córdoba.
Okay.
Right? And so
which is a town in the middle of, the road.
In what we call La Tierra de Chilapos, which are the costeños that aren't on the coast but are inland.
Okay.
And their accent is even thicker than the costeño that's on the coast.
Yeah, it's even more difficult to understand.
Right. So
they speak so fast, they swallow words.
Right, they cut them off. I always say they're like the Scots, like the Scottish of Spanish speakers.
All right. Okay.
So the thing is, you have to understand that you're driving up, you have the flat tire, you've got the spare tire, and you know that they changed the tire here because they have the tire outside that says montallantes.
Yeah.
Right? You get out, you take out the tire, and the guy who's going to change the tire comes out, oye, cuadro, ¿cómo está?
Yeah, and you say like, what?
And
Cuadro?
Then you pull out the tire and you go, te capaz sí? And then you go, cinco barras.
Cinco barras, yeah.
Right.
For the people who are watching this from Ecuador, Mexico, whatever, cuadro will be like friend.
Yeah, right.
And barras will be like bucks or dollars or whatever.
Exactly. So the thing is this, it's the accent, they're speaking your own language. They're speaking Spanish, which is your native language, and it's impossible to understand what they're saying, really.
Okay.
You figure it out because you heard cinco, so you know it's 5. I'll say it's 5,000 pesos to change the tire.
Then
okay, let's do it.
The other part of the language comes out. Like you have to gesticulate and do a lot of stuff.
So this happens with our native language.
Okay.
So it's inevitable that it's going to happen with the second language you're learning. So what I always tell people is this is one of the things that we don't really take into account when we take on the challenge of learning a language. And it's that to learn the language, we need to practice. And practice doesn't mean just talking. It means anything you can do with the language. You know, the 4 skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, do all of it as much as you can. And do it in a constructive way. Because some people are like, I'll put my cell phone in English. Okay, that's good, because at one point you'll understand everything that the cell phone can tell you in English, but then what?
Okay.
You know, then what do you do? For example, then if you have like a phone that has voice recognition, then start speaking in English to see if the phone understands you.
Ah, that would be good.
You know,
okay.
And then if it doesn't, then why didn't it understand me? Then I'll go online and I'll type in the sentence I said, and
I notice that it's my problem because I'm not doing enunciation.
So doing that those 2 steps of doing the voice recognition, seeing that the phone didn't recognize you, and then going online and figuring out, that's practice.
That's an amazing gift you just gave us. I mean, if you want to practice your pronunciation, try it with your phone, and if your phone understands the command you're given, Google or whatever, then you're doing a good job.
Exactly.
But here's a question. We as Colombians, Latin American people, we've been exposed to American culture a lot, like movies, TV. So it's kind of easier to understand an American. But many people have asked me, what if I want to go to England to study English over there? I could be scared just by the fact that I don't understand people from England because they have these explosive P's and T's and stuff like that. Have you ever had problems understanding a British person or
Absolutely.
a person? Oh, okay.
Absolutely. And like I said, that's with every language, and that's normal. I mean, and that's the thing. If you want to learn a specific accent from a specific place in a specific country, then you can practice that. You don't have to go there. You can go online and look for videos of, the Cockney accent or Scottish accent or whatever, and just practice listening to it, because accents are part of language, and it's not something that you figure out. Oh, there's a trick to understanding. Well, there is a trick. Practicing listening, practice doing it. So for example, if I'm going to go to Ireland, right? So my accent is. I learned. Let's say I'm a student and I'm studying English, and I learned with an American teacher, with a North American teacher, and so my accent is very like this, American.
Exactly.
And I need to I'm going to Scotland, so I need to learn the Scottish accent. So I get online and I start listening to the videos of Scottish and seeing how
that would be the one that's what you're doing right now, and
Scottish,
it's kind of complicated. All right.
And Scottish, the thing about Scottish is like, it's actually like costeño in Colombia. They cut off the words and you roll the R's like in Spanish, and you cut off the words. You don't say the word completely.
Wow,
that's Scottish. And then Irish is like, I like Irish because Irish is kind of like you're singing. Like you're gonna start singing a song, and of course, my version of all these accents are like from old movies. They're not like modern. Like if you go to Ireland right now and you talk to somebody who's Irish, you'll say it's similar, but his Irish is it's different because it's from old movies that I saw when I was a kid.
Okay.
But that's the thing about accents, and it's the same thing.
Great impression, by the way. I mean, that's an amazing accent.
And like in the United States, you talk about. This is very cliche, but like the California accent, we always like the surfer, it talks like this dude, like, yo, what's up? And then you go a little bit east, and you get down like into where they start talking with a southern accent, like in Texas.
Exactly, like President Bush.
Right, exactly. George W. Bush and George Bush father senior. They were both from
they
from
talk
Texas.
like in a different way.
And if you go even farther east, you still have the southern accent, but it's different now. It's like from Louisiana, Georgia. Like it has a little bit more sweetness to it. Like it kind of.
So, for example, if a student goes there and he stays in Louisiana, just that example, that's kind of obvious that by imitation he or she is gonna talk that way.
Right.
Because I remember living in Minnesota and they say we have a long O, and I was clueless. I never understood that. Like I don't get it. Yeah, we say we Minnesota, and I never heard that, and I never got that. So. Basically, when you are in one of those places, you get that and you embrace it and you think this is the way American or English is spoken.
Right. Well, the thing is this, it's like I said, it's practice and studying. And when we think of studying, we think of like getting a book and reading and doing homework and taking an exam. That's not what studying is. Studying is just doing it. Studying can be, for example, I like history. I'm a big history buff. I like to know about history, and I like to learn different stories about history. And I saw a couple years ago on Netflix, or not a year ago maybe, a series called the World War II in color.
Oh yeah,
okay. And they did World War II in color, right? And it was the whole story of all World War II. In Europe and then in the Pacific.
But not in black and white.
Right. The same movies we'd always seen in black and white, but now colorized in color. And just putting color made it amazing. It just made it so much more real.
Yeah, of course.
And recently, in Netflix, they now have another one, which is, I forget the title exactly. It's the moments of World War II, like decisive moments in color.
Okay.
And so what they do is, instead of just showing the war in general, they go to specific moments and specific battles that were decisive and change the story of the war. So it's like, for example, I remember hearing about Stalingrad when the Nazis invaded Stalingrad. But Stalingrad was actually how and what is eventos de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, events of the Second World War in color.
In color.
And so Stalingrad, for example, was when the war changed. And this was like a year and a half before the war ended. and it was the first defeat that the Nazis, the real defeat that the Nazis had, was in Stalingrad. And so I had heard about Stalingrad, but I didn't know it was the turning point.
You didn't know exactly.
The
You didn't know
turning
the story underneath.
Right. So it's the same thing with languages. You know, it's not about just studying and spending as much time as you can and like the same way that we do a course to learn something, or what we call a diplomado, or postgraduate studies, like a master's degree where we study for a year or 2 years and we just study to get the degree. With languages, it's different. It's like with something that just interests you.
Okay.
And you spend time doing it, and as you're investing time in learning, just investigating and finding information that you didn't know you don't really know what you're looking for. You're just learning, and you find information that's really important, and it will change the way you feel or the way you understand the language so far. And that's what happens. And what I always tell people is that studying a language is not like acquiring a new skill as such.
Oh, okay. So it's not like studying like what we normally do, like getting a book and open the book and stuff, but actively getting into it. I guess.
Right.
I'm understanding that.
What I explained, and that's a problem that I think that we have, both the people that offer teaching and the people that want to learn. We all make this mistake, and I think that's what we have to change in our mentality to really learn languages, is that learning a language is like playing a sport, but semi-professionally.
Okay.
Like joining a team in the league, and the day that
Training.
and the day you don't go to the league to train, you go out and run and go jogging or do exercise, because you didn't go to the league to train with your team that day, but you have to do something, because if not, you'll get out of shape and you won't be at the same level as your team members.
So, people who take a course, for example, that is very common here in Colombia, and I guess in any other part of the world, and they take a course Saturdays. Like, I'm going to study English Saturdays, 4 hours. And you know, the class is great, and I learned, and you know, a lot of things, but then I go home. Sunday I just, you know, do nothing, and then Monday probably Wednesday I open the book and try to remember, but I don't do anything. That is not obviously recommendable.
No, that's
so
not,
your
not
recommendation will be like okay, you every day do something. Would you say for a period of time, or it's not important at the time, but the activity you do, the intensity of the activity? I
would say more than the time that you dedicate every day, it's doing something every day. Okay. Make it a habit. And if it's 5 minutes or 50 minutes or 5 hours, whatever, do it.
Something meaningful, I guess.
Right. And when you say meaningful, for example, it's like maybe watching a series of Netflix and watching it in English, but not just watching it in English, because if you put it in English and
you don't understand anything.
Exactly.
It's like me
right,
trying to study Greek.
Right. Exactly. So there's different ways to do it. You know, there's different ways to do it. There's one of the ways that we use in I have a method. Its name is Speakeasy, and what we do is, for example, with Netflix, we'll take a series and we'll watch 5 minutes of an episode in Spanish, dubbed in Spanish first.
Okay.
Then we watch the same 5 minutes in English with subtitles in Spanish.
Okay.
And we watch the same 5 minutes in English with subtitles in English.
Okay.
And then we watch the same 5 minutes in English without subtitles.
That must be a hell of a show. It has to be very good, so I can watch it 4 times.
Well, the thing is this.
But for me, it's kind of new, that strategy. I want to go there a little bit longer. So the idea is that they understand in their own language what's going on, and then start comparing English with Spanish subtitles, and then English, and then English without subtitles.
Right.
Okay, but wouldn't that be something that people might say, like, I don't want to translate anything. Like, I'm so used to translate. So people say, like, hey, what's going on? Oh, okay, what's going on? ¿Qué me quiere decir? People don't get confused when they're doing that strategy. Like I'm trying to translate what I heard in Spanish into English.
Well, the thing is that when you're learning the language, right? So it's like the thing with these new translators, with these new, you know, that's really cool, you know, and it's a really good way to just be able to to solve the problem of communication.
And travel and do a lot of stuff.
Right, exactly. But you're not learning anything with that.
Exactly.
Right. But when you do this process of listening first in Spanish, you're understanding what's happening, right? In Spanish. You know what happened in those 5 minutes, what they're saying.
Yeah, you understand everything,
right.
Of course.
Then you watch it in English, and you have the subtitles again, so you're still understanding what's happening.
Exactly.
Right? So by seeing it twice, you know what's going on there. You know where the conversation is going, what's happening in the dialogue and the scene. The third step, which is in English with English subtitles, you already know what's happening. So your brain, instead of translating, what it's doing is it's seeing in English, and you already understand what's happening.
Okay.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're not translating to Spanish what's happening because you already understood what's happening. Your brain is identifying the conversation.
The way they say the situation, I know in Spanish, but in
Right,
English.
right.
Oh,
So
okay.
you're not
Cool.
you're not translating from English to Spanish because you already understand what it said in Spanish. So you're starting to identify in English what's happening.
And then the subtitles is more like for vocabulary and try to.
Well, it's to understand. The subtitles are to understand what's happening. But by doing it backwards, you're not starting with English and going to Spanish, which would be translating. You're starting with Spanish, and you're
right.
understanding what's happening, and then you're going to English, so you're identifying what's going on in the scene, in the situation, and in the conversation, but in English, because you already know what happened. So what I always talk about people is, we talk about don't translate, but sometimes we go too far, and we think that we're translating when we're just understanding.
Okay.
You know,
okay.
see what I mean? Because oh yeah, but what does that mean? That's that's a light bulb, you know, and you don't say, oh, es un bombillo, you know, you see the light bulb, you hear the word light bulb, and you see the light bulb in your mind, and you go, oh, now I know what that is.
So it's not a matter of feeling bad because I'm translated, but being or seeing that more like, okay, I'm understanding now the concept, and I'm remembering the word, and I'm remembering the word.
Exactly. So if you see that light bulb, and you're trying to light bulb, es un bombillo. You're not translating. You're just identifying light bulb as a bombillo.
Because I remember I took an Italian course. There was a time that I wanted to learn Italian. I still do. And I remember that the teacher, he was an Italian guy, and he started the class by saying like, I don't even remember the words, but he was saying like, esto en español es esto, y en italiano se dice esto. And he did like for 20 minutes. And I was like, I'm never gonna get this, and I still don't.
Right.
But maybe it's because of that. Maybe because his strategy was not make people understand, but in this case translate or remember words. And sometimes we don't have that good memory. We were talking about that a little bit earlier.
If he took that, you know, saying those, you know, this is this and this is that, and then put it in context. In a sentence.
Exactly. Not like it's separate words.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Put it in context, then that's fine. But because what you're doing is, the thing about language is that it's all about practice. And practice is not, you know, it's not
exactly.
It's
That's
not like military
that
you have to go march. It's just doing something.
For example, you were saying minutes before that you are trying to learn French. You don't know French, but trying to learn French. What are you doing? You download an app or
yeah?
What is your process for that new language?
What I do is what I always tell people is that they say, what's the best method for learning English or learning languages? And I say practice. They say, what do you mean? I say, well, there are 3 types of people that speak English that as a second language, right? The people that went and lived in a country where they speak English, right? And like me, like in my case. The people that studied English since they were a kid, and they were very good students in school, and they pay attention in class, and then they went to an academy and learned at an English academy. And then there's the people that actually speak the best, and they speak even better than the people that lived in the country in a speaking country, which are the self-taught people, los autodidactas.
Wow.
Because the self-taught people have the motivation, and they have the desire and the drive to learn the language. Right?
Yeah, because we all had students who are like in class like this, and like my mother forced me to be here, and they are never going to be good at English. As when you decided, you know, I'm going to teach myself.
Or they never even had a class.
All right.
They never had a class, and I'll give you an example. I'm an official translator, so I translate documents, legal documents, and stuff for the government, and you know, I can do this. And I got certified 15 years ago, and so you do the test, You pass the test, and then you have to go to the Ministry of Foreign Relations, the Cancillería, and you have to register your signature there, so that your signature is registered and they know it's your signature. And I got there, and it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was closed because it was lunchtime, and there was a.
And here in Colombia, we stop from 12 to 2.
Right. Especially back then.
Exactly.
And the security guard that was there, I pulled him the door, and he says, "Sir, what do you need?" And I said, "I'm here to register my signature at the Cancillería." And he said, "Oh yeah, they're at lunch. They'll be back at 2." I said, "Okay, then I'll just wait." So I went and sat on a bench and started reading a book that I had there. And I remember he walked up, and he was he didn't want to interrupt me reading, but he wanted to ask me a question. I could tell.
Okay.
And I said, "Yeah, can I help you?" All this in Spanish, right? And he says, "You're here to get your signature as a translator?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Are you an English translator?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Are you an English teacher also?" And I said, "Yeah." "Why?" He says, "Could you maybe answer a question for me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And he takes out his wallet, and he takes out a little piece of paper, and it's all folded up, and he starts opening it, and he had about, I don't know, it was full of sentences and
in English.
In English. And he says, "What's the difference between hasn't and hadn't?"
Oh, okay.
And I said, the best way to explain that to somebody, without getting into, grammatical,
Yeah, because the first thing that comes to my mind is like, oh my, I'm gonna need a book or a blackboard or whatever.
Right. There's the best way to explain it to say, hasn't is no ha hecho, and hadn't is no había hecho.
Okay.
Right, and you don't have to get into if it's the past perfect
stuff,
or pretérito imperfecto, whatever. Getting this complicated stuff that really doesn't help the person learn. Mm-hmm. So I explained.
He was an English student, I guess.
He had never had an English class in his life.
No way. So he was just learning by himself.
Right.
But he was very advanced because that's the perfect structure.
He had studied until third grade in primary. And when he's in third grade, he quit school and started working.
Wow.
And he was, probably 40 something back then. Now he'd be 50 something. And so he had always studied English. Whenever the newspaper and the Sunday edition would have a special printout of something in English, he'd go and buy the newspaper. And he had a Spanish-English dictionary, and he would just study all the time, whenever he could. So, for example, what amazed me was that he could compose a sentence perfectly. His pronunciation was like in Spanish. So he would say, for example, I knew that if I studied English, I could actually learn. And so he would say, I knew.
Exactly.
That if I studied English, I would. Right. And he would pronounce all the things literally like in Spanish.
Exactly.
But the composition of the sentence was perfect.
But that is, even with that, is amazing.
Right. He taught himself English.
But that leads me to another million of questions. First of all, because of that experience and because of your experience, you will say that grammar obviously is important, but it cannot be like the main thing when you're teaching somebody. For example, in that case, right. You're not talking to the guy, because the first is present perfect and the second is past perfect. You don't do that. So because many people are asking me all the time, is grammar important? And I said, well, it is important, but it's not. It cannot be your method of learning. Mm-hmm. You cannot learn through grammar because not everybody learns like that.
Well, it's like, take the example of what he asked. Hadn't and hasn't.
Hasn't and hadn't.
Hasn't and hadn't, right. Is that in Spanish it would be no ha y no ha habido. No ha hecho y no había hecho, right? So in Spanish, we all speak Spanish, we all understand the difference, but explain to me in grammar, or ask anybody in the street, they explain to me what the difference is grammatically. They have no idea.
They don't even know that it's a perfect sentence.
Right, exactly. And they don't understand, and to really understand that, I would say that we don't have to be, or who needs to understand that? Maybe an editor for a teacher that edits books and stuff like that. Exactly. And even as a teacher, how important is it to know that? Because at one point, if the student doesn't understand that in Spanish, how they can understand it in English.
Okay.
Right? If they don't
Okay.
understand, right? Si no sabemos qué es el pretérito imperfecto in Spanish,
that's good.
how are we going to know what it is in
Yeah,
English?
it's
And
not
if
gonna
and if
work.
we make that in and if we put that into our teaching method in English, we're just going to confuse them.
Okay.
So I think that the best way to teach English is to learn how to pronounce correctly. And when we talk about correct pronunciation, we're talking about the basics that are above accents.
That's going to be my second question, because related to that example, which is a great example, he could produce sentences, but in speaking that way, which will be, I mean, it's my feeling that people might, I mean, I'm talking about native people, they might accept a little bit better if you are not grammatically correct, but they would not take easily wrong pronunciation.
Right.
See my point? I mean, anybody could go to America and say, "Oh, my mother don't know how to cook," and people will say like, "Okay, he's probably Colombian. He has no idea." But if I go like, "My mother done it," I mean, people.
Do isn't.
Exactly.
Do isn't.
So,
no, right.
So students will be interested in learning a little bit more pronunciation than grammar at one point. It's what I'm kind of
absolutely.
taking from that example.
And the thing is, I think that because of the idea that we have that the accents are so different, I think that's what happened maybe with English teaching, is that we hear an Australian mate, Australian talk like this, like with the mouth stretched back like this, and then we have the proper Londonese, that's different, and then you've got the Irish and the Scottish that talk like this, and then you got the normal American and the Southern American and New York,
and then a Korean talking in English, and then a Japanese talking in English.
Well, they're talking in English, Japanese talk like this, and so we have this false idea that because the accents are so different, there isn't a basic way of pronouncing correctly. And there is.
Okay.
And the problem with all these different accents is that all these people learned with that same idea that there's not a basic way of pronouncing English correctly.
Okay.
And there is. And
All right.
that's the trick, and I hope that someday with my method of teaching, that's kind of like the missing link that I want to fill in with English teaching, is that there is a basic way of teaching English. When I was in second grade in primary school in Alaska, they taught us something called the long sound and the short sound of the vowels.
Okay.
And they were teaching this in second grade. We were 8-year-olds, 7, 8-year-olds.
And you thought like this is too advanced for me?
No. I understood it perfectly.
Oh, okay.
What I've never understood is that, after years of teaching English, I've never seen that as part of a method to teach these elements of English pronunciation that are universal. And that if we understand these elements, then it makes pronunciation a lot easier. It makes it a lot easier to understand how English is pronounced and why it's pronounced the way it is.
So let me ask you something. What about the repeat after me? Just the repeat after me.
Well,
there.
The problem with repeat after me is if what they're going to say, if they're pronouncing correctly or not.
If the teacher is actually pronouncing correctly. Because, I've been... sometimes I was talking to some friends, and we were kind of criticizing the fact that many teachers use their method just by saying, repeat after me. And they think, okay, I got it all covered. This is it. And they know pronunciation because they are saying exactly what I am saying. But the thing is that you need to understand what's going on with those letters, with those sounds, to actually understand the pronunciation.
Right.
That's what I was saying to those people all the time. Like, okay, if you want to pronounce very good, which is, to me is one of the toughest part, the pronunciation, you need to understand the way it is pronounced because of the rule specifically that they have.
Right. And the thing about English is that what I have this, this theory. I don't know if it's true, because when we're talking about history and about linguistics and this, there's nothing that's really like scientific cold cut. Why English is the way it is, and I have a theory that English, because it's come from Britain, that's an island. When we look at the history of languages, it all has to do with the invaders, with who invaded and imposed their new language on the people of this region, and being an island, they had nowhere to go. So they had to just accept their invaders and accept their languages. So we have the mixes of the basic languages, which were the Anglo-Saxon, the Angles and the Utes, which came like from Denmark, and then the Vikings that came from Scandinavia. And this is why, you know, English is basically, they say it's Germanic more than romantic, more than Romance language. And then the Romans came with Latin, right? So that's why English has Latin in it also. There's a lot of Latin in it as well. So we have Latin, we have Germanic, we have Scandinavian, we have the basic language, which is Celtic, the Celtas,
Celtics.
right? This is the Celtics. And we call the Celtics is the team, right?
Yeah.
And
the Celtics,
the Celts,
is that the Celtics,
right? The Celts, right? And so all these influences came in, and every single language had different grammar, right? So if the English had took in all the different elements of grammar, can you imagine how crazy the language would be? It would be absurd.
Impossible to learn and to pronounce.
Right. So what happened was, this is my theory. I don't know if this is my theory. I think that what happened was that they sort of just said, no, not the grammar, just the vocabulary and the words. And that's why English grammar is basically simple.
Okay.
English grammar compared to Spanish, I mean, for example, for me, I still make mistakes. I still have to think about it when I'm going to say a sentence. You know, if I said, did I say usted or did I say tú? And depending on which one I said, how am I going to conjugate the verb?
Exactly.
Right? Did I say usted vive or tú? Usted vives or tú vive? You know, what did I say? So how do I conjugate the verb? That doesn't happen in English. English is a lot simpler.
It's very simple.
So what happened with English actually is that the pronunciation didn't become complicated. It became ambiguous.
Oh, okay.
Do you understand the difference?
Yeah.
It's not complicated. It really isn't complicated because there are basic rules to pronunciation in English. It's just that spelling and pronunciation became very ambiguous in English. And when you start to really study the language, you see that that's true. And so the trick is...
That would be the complication. When people say that this is too complicated, it's not complicated. It's in this case ambiguous.
Yeah, right. It's ambiguous. It's not always, you don't always pronounce the same letters or the same letter the same way. That's all. But there's still a limit to the way you can pronounce. For example, diphthongs or diphthongus, right? There's really only two in English, which is oi and ow. Like now, cow, or boy, toy, right? Really, there's no other diphthongs. There's really no other mix or where two vowels come together and make a different new sound.
But in Spanish we have a lot.
Exactly.
So that's the thing.
Exactly. In Spanish we have a lot, but in English we don't. There's a lot of words where there's two vowels, right? But really, what it is, the sound is one of the vowel sounds. Mm-hmm. It's not a mix of the two. It's just in that word, it's the long sound of e, or it's the short sound of o. And that's the thing about English. We have the long sound and the short sound. Every vowel has two sounds.
I remember that long time ago you had a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have many, but I remember this particularly, which is It's Cool.
Uh-huh.
Remember that you host a show and you were traveling all over the city and talking in English, and that was a wake-up call for everybody, was because like, oh, that guy is actually pronouncing the words, because I've heard my teachers and they're kind of Colombians, and this is the way speaking in English. I mean, this is the way English is spoken. I would say that.
Yeah.
So I want to say thank you for that, for being an inspiration.
It was my
you have a company now that teaches English,
Yep.
and whether you're watching this from Mexico, Peru, whatever, they can contact you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The thing is, what I'm trying to do with what we are trying to do with our new method is figure out the way so that people actually learn.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna tell No, I won't say that.
Oh, come on.
No. That one time I was speaking with an English teaching businessman. He wasn't a teacher. He was a person that had an English teaching company. And I explained to him my method, and he said, that's really nice, but it's not going to work. And I said, why? And he says, because you actually want to teach English.
Oh.
And I said, excuse me? What?
Pardon?
Yeah, pardon me, what'd you say? And he says, yeah, the business is selling English courses, not teaching English.
Wow.
And so that was sort of a wake-up call for me, too, that like many other businesses, it's really cutthroat. It's all about just making money and not about actually giving a service or a product, or a good product or a good service. And so that motivated me to continually improve our method of teaching. And not, oh, we figured it out. No, we're constantly improving.
Yeah, because that depends on every student, I guess.
Right. And so I think that, we talk about what's the best. Is it go-to classes, or what was in Spanish, presenciales, or is it virtual? Which is best? I think it's a mix of everything.
Okay.
I think if we can figure out a method, why? Because that's what the self-taught people do. The people that actually speak English that never had class or had classes, but then would take time to study at home or practice whenever they could, that's what they do. They mix everything. So the trick to learning a language is mixing all the different formats.
If anybody was watching this and they say like, I really love this teacher and I want to get in contact with him, how can they do it?
Through my webpage, speakeasynow.com.
Okay.
Speakeasynow.com.
All right.
Okay.
And then they will have the information for the courses,
right.
whether they live in Colombia or they live in any other place.
Right. The idea right now we're in Colombia, and we do want to expand to Mexico, to the United States.
Right.
Because there's so many people in the United States that are learning English. They could really use this, because what we do is I teach English, I'm an actor, and I've mixed both things also. I've done voice coaching in movies and series and stuff, where I've taught other actors how to pronounce English correctly or how to pronounce Spanish correctly. I remember last year we were working on a series on the second season of Jack Ryan on Amazon. And there was an actor, Michael Kelly, really good actor, and he doesn't speak Spanish, but his character does. And so he needed to speak Spanish in this scene. And so with the little tricks, I've always focused on pronunciation, and it's not that I knew this, it's just that by working on the scene with him, I discovered it. He had to say madera.
Okay.
And he was saying Madeira.
Yeah,
Madeira,
of course.
Madeira.
Of course, as a gringo will do.
Right, but then it hit me, we don't even realize this as Spanish speakers, that when D is in the middle of a word, not at the beginning and not at the end, but in the middle, we don't pronounce it like a D in Spanish. We pronounce it like a TH. Madera.
Madera, okay.
You see?
When we say this.
Right, exactly.
That.
It's a voiced TH, right?
Okay.
Unvoiced and voiced. This is the voiced
And
one.
that's the way you taught the guy?
Yeah, exactly. It
and he
me.
said Madera afterwards?
Right, yeah. And it hit me, and then it was like, and actually the R at the end is more like a D. So it's not Madeira, it's Madeda. And the R at
and
the
then
end
he
is
was
like a
getting
D.
it,
Oh, it sounded perfect. I mean, he still had the American accent,
good.
which he needed to have, because in the scene he's not Venezuelan, he's American, the character, but he had to be a guy that spoke good Spanish.
Wow.
Right?
You have to come back to another show because we have a lot of things to talk, and now so could you remind us again the web page?
Speakeasynow.com.
All right, okay. Well, Andrew, thank you very much for this precious moment that we are having with you, and we're looking forward to have you again in the show.
Absolutely, I'd love to be back, man.
And cool shirt, by the way. You have a very nice shirt.
Yeah, it's my team.
That's the Deportivo Independiente Medellín. That's the soccer team.
Yeah, people always ask me. They say, "You're a gringo," and I say,
Yeah.
"No, I'm Colombian. I really am."
You don't look like a Colombian, by the way.
I say, "Hey, first of all, las apariencias engañan.
Okay.
Appearances can be deceiving, and second of all, I'll say this in Spanish. Soy tan de Medellín que soy del Medellín."
Hincha del Medellín, which is a sport team over here. Okay, Andrew, thank you very much. And you guys, thank you very much for being on the Alejo Show. I will see you in another episode. So good luck, guys. See you later.
Welcome to